The Void, Series 1, Episode 1, The Naled, Chapter 7. The Liberator arrived in the Sierra system several metric days later, traversing a phenomenal distance from Triskel. The Republic covered a vast amount of systems, but in that regard, it was no different to any of the corporate empires. Sliding towards Sierra Lament, it did not take them long to reach the planetary body, located within the habitable zone of the system. The command center, which had been ticking over fairly quietly over the past few metric days, was now much more alive with activity as they prepared their mission. Captain Schaefer and Commander Voight had assumed respective positions. Hanna and Denham Richt had both assumed their positions on workstations. Upon positioning themselves in orbit around Sierra Lament, the first order of business was to scan the planet. There was long-range analysis done beforehand, so they had an idea of what to expect, but high definition of the data was required to validate this. "Well, there it is. Sierra Lament," Schaefer announced.
"Looks fairly innocuous from up here," Voight expressed, "but you can never tell what hazards might lurk underneath the clouds."
"Doctor, the scans reveal anything yet?"
"Initial scans confirm the long-range ones in regards to the atmosphere. Oxygen content is higher than expected. We'll have to use regulators if we're to avoid hyperoxia, and goggles to avoid retinal damage." "Regulators?" Voight sighed with dismay. "I hate putting those things in. Preferable to hyperoxia, Commander." I know, Voight conceded. "Doesn't make them any less unpleasant."
Voight had grown accustomed to the presence of the regulator at the back of the throat, but it was still uncomfortable. They helped in environments that were tolerable, but not quite breathable, but they did feel intrusive, and some people couldn't help but gag on them. It would be remiss of me if I didn't remind you that with such a high concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere, we need to be more careful regarding potential ignition sources. Any projectile weapons could cause dangerous fires, so if you need to use them, be aware that you might cause further problems," Denham added.
"How likely?"
"It's hard to say, Commander. Depends on local conditions, but I'd say you've got a good chance of starting one." "I've seen a gun explode in an oxygen-rich environment before," Schaefer stated. "What do we have in the form of alternatives?"
"We have Horsa light railguns, sir," Hanna responded. "Of course, the light part of that sentence is very relative."
"I know them. Heavy, slow rate of fire, but undeniably effective," Schaefer partly approved. "Have you received training in them, Commander?"
"Yes, sir," Voight answered. "Not too much cause to fire one in the wild, though."
"Let's hope we don't have to today, either."
"Planet has a 14-hour day. Temperature ranges from a few degrees above zero to a few hundred degrees below in some places. Gravity is roughly 10% less than Triskel."
"Where's the colony? Is it all in one region or spread out?"
"It's in one of the warmest areas near the equator. Still be rather chilly, though."
"Just the one location, then?"
"Yes, it's a rather large complex, built to hold around 20 to 30,000 people, at least. Possibly more. There's a lot of big buildings covering a lot of distance that could house a lot more, if they were barracks of some kind."
"Life signs?"
"Plenty. Seems to be a mix of native and imported animals. Can't tell what species there are, but the biosignatures point to a mix of biochemistries."
"Anything that might be intelligent or a threat?" "No signs of any intelligent design or artificial alien structures, but that doesn't rule intelligence out completely. But there's nothing recognizable. As for threats, well, wherever there are native species, there are always going to be predators," Denham elaborated. "Any indigenous life is likely to be undocumented, so best be wary of any animals you don't recognize." "No humans, then?" "None."
"Hanna, can you access any further networks?" Voight queried. "No, sir. There's active technology down there, but any networks down there are closed."
"Makes sense for a hidden installation," Schaefer reasoned.
"Any ships on the surface?" "There's a number around the airfield, a few military ships, nothing heavy-duty, and a few cargo haulers. A few other miscellaneous ships as well, indeterminate function or origin," Hanna responded.
"Looks like a ghost town, then," Voight observed. "Flight Commander Sokolov, are you Voight-born?"
"Yes, sir,"
Sokolov responded, Quan-Cam.
"Got a squadron of Spectres sweeping the area now, but it all looks peaceful right now."
"Acknowledged. Please stay on guard."
"Looks like we're good for ground reconnaissance," Voight determined.
"Agreed. Major Varma."
"Yes, sir."
"Take a must to the surface. Take a Firestorm with you. Commander Voight will join you shortly."
Yes, sir. Hanna, you're with me. Voight started heading towards the rear of the command center. Hanna stood up and followed her, a subordinate taking a place at the console.
Commander,
Schaefer called after her.
Be careful down there.
I will, sir. Voight summoned the elevator as Hanna caught up with her. It opened quietly and they both stepped in. Kane, hangar deck, please.
Yes, Commander. Shall I join you there?
If you would, Kane. There was a moment of silence as the elevator descended at high speed. Voight was still mentally preparing herself for the next conversation, as she knew it was going to be a sensitive subject. Hanna, may I ask you a favor? Sure, Commander. I expect you're probably reluctant to talk about it, so I didn't want to mention it in front of the others. You're referring to my abilities? Yes. I didn't want to mention it so early on as we barely know each other, and I wanted to respect your privacy. It's okay, Commander. I knew either you or the captain would mention it sooner or later, Hanna acknowledged. But I do appreciate that if you're being discreet about it. I don't like reminding people about it as it just raises suspicion in them. I can imagine it's quite isolating. You have no idea, Commander, Hanna responded. Few people trust a telepath. Sadly, it seems prejudice is still all too common. I can't imagine you want to read too many thoughts anyway. I would imagine most of them are pretty mundane. Most are, Commander. I'd rather shut them out, to be honest. Mind you, some people are going to be more of a short story than a novel anyway, Voight dryly quipped, smiling. Hanna laughed. What I wanted to ask you was, well, I don't know quite how it works, so correct me if I'm wrong, but can you tell if there are other people in the area, even if they're hiding? Yes, most people don't know how to restrain their thoughts, so they are just constantly broadcasting their presence to someone like me. Good. Could you keep monitoring the area when we're on the surface? I don't expect anyone to be there, but it would be nice to get some advance warning if there is anyone hiding down there. I'll let you know if I sense anything. Thank you. If you don't want to mention it within earshot of anyone else, just take me aside for a moment. We'll keep this just between you and me. I'd appreciate that, Hanna replied. For the few remaining moments they descended, they remained in silence. Voight felt it was a little awkward considering what she had just asked of Hanna. I couldn't help but wonder if she could pick up on a discomfort. Voight trusted telepaths to respect the privacy of others, and her experience of them bore this out. As many of them struggled to earn the trust of others, a strict adherence to respecting privacy was generally accepted. Not that this placated many people's deep-seated fears, though. The elevator came to a rest and the door silently opened. They ventured forth into the corridor and took a turn left as it ended, eventually emerging at the edge of the hangar. It was a vast space within the hull of the ship, and many smaller ships lined the edges. There were also further ships housed in bays at either end of the hangar. Most of these ships were small, fighters, bombers, scout craft, and the like, but there were also larger ones as well. The mech unit support transport, Must, was one of these. It was designed as both a troop transport and as a mobile platform for land-based mech suits. The suits were effectively vertical tanks and were effective weapons, but they required a substantial amount of support due to the complex nature of the articulated locomotion. They came in a range of sizes, but most were relatively small and were used as troop support when heavy but mobile fire was required. Voight could see Major Varma assisting in loading the single mech unit that could fit into the Must, one of his troops operating the loader that lifted the heavy load. Major Varma? Commander, Sanjeev nodded in acknowledgement. The reconnaissance unit is ready to go. We just have to secure the mech and we'll be off. Good, Voight approved. Most of these installations usually have the command center near the airfield. Hanna, do we have confirmation of that? Hanna Ilias whipped out a small tablet from the chest pocket of her uniform and interacted with the screen briefly. There's a structure near the airfield that looks like the main candidate for the command center, but we cannot be sure at this moment. Major, what do you suppose? 5 teams of 2. 2 teams will initially stay with the ship, covering each side. The other 3 teams will approach the command center in a staggered formation. The leading team will move forward, establish a position, and allow the second team to head forwards. When they've found a position, the tertiary team will move ahead and find their position. The first team will then take up point again whilst the others provide cover. Once one of the teams reaches the command center, we will effect entrance, and the teams will converge to secure the interior. Hanna, when the Major has secured the building, I want you to locate a terminal on the closed network and try and get access to the data. Yes, sir. Commander,
I will assist Lieutenant Commander Ilias in that endeavor, Kane announced as he approached the group.
Good call, Kane.
Once we've secured the building, 3 teams will do a sweep on the nearby area. One will remain in the command center and the other will remain with the ship. Once the initial sweep has been achieved, one of the pilots should investigate the other ships and see if they're spaceworthy.
I agree. If they're operational, it'll be good to know we have the option should we require them.
There was a dull clunk as the mech unit was positioned in the holding cage. 2 of the troops quickly secured it into position and hollowed out its status.
I think that means we're ready, Voight decided.
Okay then, people, get yourselves on the bus, Varma ordered the reconnaissance team, who dutifully obeyed. As he turned around, Voight noticed a weapon strapped to the Major's back.
Is that a sword, Major?
It's a Kanda, Commander, Varma explained. I find the standard combat knife a little small. Now the troops were aboard. Voight, Varma, Hanna, and Kane climbed on board. As you know, Commander, we are all allowed our own weaponry, depending on our own disciplines. I chose the Kanda as it makes an excellent close-quarter weapon, and I'm quite proficient in its use. Dawkins here specializes in sonic weaponry, so she has a screecher, and Mayhew there specializes in hand-to-hand combat, so he has a pair of power fists. And we know what he uses them for, one of the other soldiers joked, provoking some laughter among the others. I'm never going to stop hearing that one, Mayhew sighed. Leave Mayhew alone, Mehmet.
Thank you, Major.
What he does in his own time is his own business, Varma smiled, eliciting further chuckling. Thanks a lot, Mayhew sighed again. Take us out, Singh, Varma notified the pilot. Indicating his compliance, the pilot closed the rear hatch and initiated the engines, using the magnetic levitation to taxi around the hangar and give the vessel a gentle nudge towards the exit. The huge hangar doors parted, revealing a blue shimmering effect generated by the nanoswarm that acted as a barrier between the atmosphere in the hangar and the vacuum outside. Each member of the swarm generated enough charge around it as to effectively act as a solid barrier, or perhaps more appropriately, a net. As the transport reached the threshold, the nanoswarm parted to allow the transport through, remaining close enough to keep the seal airtight, like a permeable membrane across the gaping hole in the hull. Once into space, the pilot initiated the main engine, providing enough thrust to push them away from the Liberator.
Kane, can you give us a view of the ship? Voight asked.
On command, the side of the ship became transparent, allowing them to view the Liberator from within the transport. As they moved away from the Liberator, the scale of the dreadnought became apparent. Voight marveled at it, reminding herself that she was the second in command of that gigantic ship.
So much bigger than the Benavides,
she whispered, appreciating the scale of both the ship and her responsibility. The Benavides is the Ardent class, isn't it? Varma inquired.
Yeah.
Impressive ships, tough for their size.
Bit pokey, though,
Voight responded, especially compared to the luxury we have now. You won't hear me complain about that, Varma smiled.
Kane, can you switch focus to the planet?
The transparent window glided around the hull until it rested on the planet. It was mostly a pale reddish-brown with splashes of greenery. There were patches of water, though they were more like distributed large lakes than oceans. Nowhere near the abundance of a planet like Triskel. There did appear to be a surfeit of ice at either pole of the planet, though.
Looks more barren than I expected,
Voight commented.
If it had been less so, it probably would have been colonized properly, rather than just having a secret outpost,
Hanna interjected.
Enough to support a small population, but not enough for a large civilian one.
Good point. They descended into the haze of the atmosphere, approaching the ground with measured velocity. It might get a bit bumpy from now on, especially if the engines ignite the oxygen, the pilot warned. We'll switch to maglev as soon as possible. The view through the transparent section of the hull became difficult to see through as the air around them started to burn. Might as well shut off the view pane for now, Kane advised. I'll reactivate it when there's more to see. The transport rattled as it buffeted the atmosphere, their descent turning into a fireball. There was a series of jolts as the reaction outside got more volatile. Nothing too disruptive, but enough to make the occupants a little more anxious.
Tell me again how much heat this thing can withstand,
Hanna asked, her tension visible. You're quite safe, Kane reassured. The vessel can withstand much higher temperatures than we're currently experiencing. It might look dramatic, but we're well within operational parameters. There was a sudden hum as the maglev kicked into gear, working furiously to interact with the magnetic field of the planet. As the altitude decreased, so the maglev increased in effectiveness, and the standard engines were gently decreased. The fireball outside slowly subsided, and the jolting ceased. "There we go," Kane soothed. "Back to normal." The view pane switched back into life, and they could see they were much closer to the ground now. Fine detail could be easily made out, including the vegetation and trees. As the view pane panned around so they could see the view of the horizon, they could see a lake in the distance. Angular shapes could be made out, giving them the first glimpses of artificial construction. More and more geometric shapes could be made out as the industrial complex emerged. Most of the buildings were large, resembling warehouses or perhaps a production line. The surrounding area was fairly barren and rocky, though there appeared to be plenty of moss around, covering the boulders and the escarpments. There were animals too, wandering around the site without any concern for the edifices around them. It was difficult to make out precise species, but there was a definite undulate familiarity about them. "Coming up in the airfield," the pilot announced as he brought the transport around to a long landing strip. They landed gently, with just the tiniest of bumps as they made contact with the ground. "Time to get the regulators in," Varma reminded. This was the moment Voight dreaded. One of the soldiers handed her a neoplastic-wrapped package, which she tore open with reluctant effort. Inside the package was a thin frame with a gelatinous web in the middle. She picked it up with disgust and maneuvered it into her mouth, sliding it carefully to the back of her throat, gagging slightly as she did so. The thin frame molded itself intelligently to the shape of her throat, ensuring as tight a seal as possible without being too discomforting. The mucus-like membrane would restrict the amount of oxygen, keeping it within human tolerance. "Oh, I hate these things," she gasped. "I swallowed one of these once," one of the soldiers intimated. "That wasn't pleasant going down. Good job they break down once in the stomach. If it was as uncomfortable going out as it was going in, well, it wouldn't have been much fun." "Thanks for that particularly pleasant mental image," Voight responded in revulsion. "Still better than being suited and booted," Mayhew testified. "Less to restrict your movement." "Less of the gun, more of the gun," Varma ordered. The soldiers heeded the call to action and retrieved their Hauser railguns from the storage compartments, bumping into each other as they did so. Voight waited until everyone else had obtained their weapons before procuring hers. As she removed it from the secured rack, her arms went down. It was every bit as heavy as she remembered, and it took some effort to keep it raised. It was fortunate, then, that it came with a support harness that took some of the weight and distributed it more evenly around her torso. "Everyone ready up then?" Varma asked, receiving a series of acknowledgements. "Archer, open it up." The rear of the transport unfolded, and the atmosphere rushed in with a gust, blowing a very cold wind directly at them. If it wasn't freezing, Voight thought, it was close to it. "Venesh, Shuba, you cover that side of the ship. Mehmet, Heinzer, you cover this side," Varma commanded. "Hoover, Mayhew, Alpha Team. Dawkins, Sheen, Beta Team. Messier, Goldblatt, Delta Team." "Which is the command building, Hanna?" "Should be that one, sir." Hanna pointed at a fairly innocuous building. It was taller than the others, but not by much. Usually such structures could be determined by a volume of communications equipment adorning the upper levels of the building, but this one had a single low-profile transmitter. "Alpha, you're up." Hoover and Mayhew started cautiously approaching the building, whilst the Beta and Delta teams kept overwatch. Hanna caught Voight's eye and subtly tapped the side of her head and then shook it. Voight nodded in response. Hoover and Mayhew found some cover by a grounded shuttle and took up their position, giving Dawkins and Sheen their opportunity to make some ground. Cautiously, the three teams made their way to the building, leapfrogging each other in turn. They reached their destination without incident, just the cold wind blowing across the airfield. "Doors open," Dawkins announced over the comms built into their uniforms. "Power seems to be still on, though." They watched the teams disappear inside and waited, listening to their exchanges over the comms. The repetitive calls and notifications continued without change, indicating an uneventful search. Eventually came a blessed change to the monotony when Dawkins announced that the building was empty and secure. "Okay, Venesh, Shuba, you two stay here. Mehmet, Heinze, you come with us. Singh, check on these other ships. See if any are space-worthy and powered, but be aware of your surroundings and don't take any risks." With that, Voight and the others started making their way towards the building.
"Nothing so far, then?" Voight whispered to Hanna. "No, nothing," Hanna responded. I can sense animals around, but it feels a bit weird. Could just be some unfamiliar species, though. Nothing intelligent? They're all intelligent to some degree, Hanna corrected her. You'd be surprised how busy an animal's mind is. You can read their thoughts as well? To some extent, not so much with some, but quite a lot with others, Hanna explained, quietly. Humans are easy because there's a shared frame of reference, but you don't have that with other species. But it can be done. Must give you an interesting insight. It's why I can't bring myself to eat any kind of meat, even comstock or that meat tree stuff. I can't say I've even considered that before, Voight admitted. It's not something I tend to talk about much. I don't want to get tarnished with the militant vegetarian tag as well, Hanna smiled. Voight responded with her own grin, finding amusement in the concept. All right, just let me know if anything changes. Will do. With that, they were at the building. Entering, they found the building derelict. Most of the rooms appeared to be used as offices with computers and media pads and a cornucopia of various technical gadgets. They came to a stairwell and started making their way upwards. Each floor seemed to be much the same as the first, with perhaps a subtle shift to more meeting rooms as they ascended. As they reached the top floor, they caught up with the soldiers in a room with a good visibility of the surrounding area and a plethora of technical equipment. It was all very much what Voight would have expected from a control center in a small colony. There were a few personal effects around as well, a few photos, souvenirs, and office toys. There was a very strong, stale smell emanating from a coffee machine against the stairwell, and there was visible mold growing out of it. Given the length of time this building had been lying derelict, it could and perhaps should have been much worse.
Have you seen anything from up here? Varma asked. You can see a good part of the colony from up here, sir, Mayhew described. There's plenty of blind spots, but good overall visibility. No people, then? Not a single soul, sir.
So it looks as if it's been completely abandoned, Voight reasoned.
We can't make that assumption yet, Commander, Varma contested. We need to do a more thorough search before we can say for certain.
You're right, Major, Voight conceded. Either way, we've established a foothold here, and now we start the investigation.